Welcome to the Deep Dive. You'd think medical school, focusing so much on the body, would really prepare doctors for everything life throws at us.
You really would.
But Atul Gawande, in Being Mortal, points out this striking thing. They focus so intensely on saving lives, fixing things, that the end part, aging, getting frail, dying, it actually gets very little airtime.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? You're learning all these amazing ways to keep the machine running, but almost nothing about when it, well, naturally starts to slow down.
Yeah.
And that's such a critical point he makes right off the bat. It makes you think differently about healthcare. The medical world, often it sees death as like the ultimate enemy, the failure.
Right, the thing to beat.
Exactly. But Gawande brings in Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich to show how that denial, that constant focus on just being sick and needing a cure, can cause incredible suffering. Ivan Ilyish's agony wasn't just physical,
No.
It was everyone around him pretending he wasn't actually dying. That pretense.
Oof, and you have to wonder how often that still happens today, right?
All the time, probably. And it's not just philosophical, it directly affects care. Gawande talks about an early patient, Joseph Lazaroff. Prostate cancer, metastatic it had spread.
Oh, yeah?
His situation was terminal, but the proposed surgery, super risky spinal cord pressure, it wouldn't change the ultimate outcome.
But they still push for it.
Well, the deeper truths, the limits of what medicine could really do, they were just sort of avoided. It was always about the next step, the next treatment.
Which sounds like hope, maybe, but it avoids the really tough, necessary conversations.
Precisely. And this reflects a huge shift in how we as a society experience death. Like you said, back in, 1945? Most people died at home.
Yeah, surrounded by family.
By the 80s. Completely flipped. Hospitals, nursing homes, that's where most deaths happen.
So we've lost that familiarity, that closeness to the process.
Exactly. There's a distance now, even for doctors sometimes, who might only see death in that very clinical setting.
Gawande talks about his own shock as a new doctor. He called death a violation when medicine couldn't fix it.
He even had nightmares about it.
Wow. It shows how deep that expectation runs, doesn't it? That medicine should always win.
Which is why his simple statement is so powerful. Death, of course, is not a failure. Death is normal.
Such a stark contrast to the enemy view.
Right. And Sherwin Nuland noticed this too, that past generations were maybe more accepting of nature's final victory, less arrogant about trying to deny it.
So that's what we're trying to get into in this deep dive. Following Gawande's lead. Really looking at aging and dying. Seeing where this system often falls short for the elderly, for the terminally ill.
And exploring if there are better ways. Because right now, you see treatments that wreck quality of life, institutions that disconnect people from what they actually care about.
Yeah.
And to get why we're here, we need to look at our values. Gawande talks about this idea of the independent self. It's huge in modern society.
Autonomy. Making your own choices. Living life on your own terms. We value that incredibly highly.
How much do you value your own independence? It's a big deal for most of us.
He uses Alice Hobson as an example. She really cherished living independently, own home, own finances, totally self-sufficient even when she was older.
Which is, like you said, very different from how things used to be. Gawande tells this wonderful story about his grandfather in India, Sitaram.
Lived past 100, right?
Yeah. And he was totally woven into the family, respected, consulted on big decisions, that multi-generational living. That was the standard for most of human history.
But things changed. People got more resources, more opportunities. They wanted separation.
Freedom. That phrase, intimacy at a distance, captures it well. Connection, sure, but also personal space.
And the stats show it, right? Fewer elderly people living with their kids in the U.S., in Europe.
Definitely. So that old veneration of elders might have faded a bit, but it's been replaced by this huge veneration of the independent self. Your autonomy is king.
And that shapes everything about how we see getting older.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the physical side of aging. It's not just stuff wearing out. Gawande points out this weird thing where our bodies actually get more rigid. Calcium deposits in blood vessels, joints, even while our bones get less dense.
Huh. That is complex.
And scientifically, aging itself is fascinating. They can tweak a gene in a worm like C. elegans and make it live way longer.
Right.
But for humans, for most of history, our lifespans were super short. So these long lives we have now, historically speaking, they're kind of unnatural.
And complex systems like us, they don't just switch off, do they?
No, it's more like Random gradual failures, we have backups, redundancies, 2 kidneys, DNA repair that give us resilience, but not forever.
Not immortality.
Exactly. Gawande gives this great example of Dr. Bluto observing an 85-year-old woman, Jean Gavrils, living on her own.
What was insightful about it?
Bluto wasn't just looking at her diseases, he was watching the details. How she walked, her feet, her overall well-being.
The small things.
Yeah. And his suggestions were simple. Better shoes, more social interaction. A year later, she was doing better, still independent.
Simple things making a big difference. Makes you think about how crucial those basics are, like good shoes.
It really does. And it's such a contrast to Alice Hobson's story, where her falls weren't seen as this big warning sign about her independence.
They just treated each fall separately.
Pretty much. Instead of looking at the bigger picture of her functional decline and what that meant for her wanting to stay independent.
Which brings up a key point.
Hmm.
Medicine can help manage decline, make it slower, preserve abilities.
Absolutely. But the system often focuses on one disease at a time, not the whole person with multiple issues, especially when they're older.
And then there's the money side of geriatrics.
Yeah. Gawande points out that providing that really good, comprehensive geriatric care, it often costs hospitals more than it brings in.
And Medicare doesn't make up the difference.
Nope. So hospitals aren't incentivized to invest in it. Doctors aren't rushing into the specialty.
Which limits access to that holistic care people need. You wonder how much those economics shape the care people actually get.
It definitely shapes it. Felix Silverstone, a big name in geriatrics, he lived this himself in his late 80s. Moved to a retirement community, Orchard Cove, with his wife Bella, who had dementia.
An independent living place.
Yeah, but Felix became Bella's main caregiver. And Guan says it gave him a new sense of purpose. He describes their dinner routine, Felix just so attentive to her needs even as her dementia progressed.
The connection's still there.
Deeply. And Felix himself stayed incredibly active, driving, teaching, involved in the community, even as Bella lost vision, hearing, memory.
Wow.
Their connection, the comfort they took just being together, it's really powerful.
But even in that setting, things can change fast.
They did. Bella fell, broke both legs. It was a crisis. Felix just couldn't manage her care anymore. She had to move to the nursing home floor.
So even with dedication and a supportive place, there are limits when frailty becomes severe. Makes you think about what real support looks like then.
Totally. And it contrasts so sharply with Alice Hobson's feeling about her own home.
She dreaded leaving it.
Absolutely dreaded it. That house was her control center, her identity. Senior living might be safer, sure, but it meant structure, supervision, things she fought against. What is home when you get older?
Good question. Historically, if you were old, frail, no family, no money, it was the poorhouse.
Grim places. Gawande describes them lack of basic care, dehumanizing. Awful.
So the modern nursing home was supposed to be better than that.
An escape, yeah. Regular meals, some medical care, but still, people often see them negatively. There's this feeling we want something more than just being kept safe and alive.
Like Harry Truman, the guy near Mount St. Helens.
Exactly. 83 years old, volcanoes erupting, and he refuses to leave his home. That fierce desire to stay put, live on your own terms, even with huge risks. What risks would you take for autonomy?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
But you see his point, and Alice Hobson's. For them, the home was life. Giving it up felt like giving up themselves.
And how did nursing homes even become the default? Gawande says it wasn't really about making life better for the elderly. It was more of a medical fix, like, let's put them in a hospital type place. Maybe doctors can figure it out. This was when hospitals were shifting from basic care places to active treatment centers.
And things like pensions help people avoid poverty, but not the frailty part.
Right. Pensions didn't solve the problem of needing actual care if you couldn't manage alone. So nursing homes kind of filled that gap, became the go-to solution.
But even the nice ones,
yeah,
you lose control.
A lot of control. Daily routines are often regimented. Safety and medical needs can overshadow what you actually want to do, what gives your life meaning. Think about food restrictions, rules about behavior.
Even small things like that can chip away at your sense of self, can't they?
Definitely. Lou Sanders' story really hits this home. Heart attack, falls, Parkinson's, memory problems. He moved in with his daughter, Shelley.
Which sounds like a good solution initially.
But the reality for Shelley juggling work, her own family, plus intensive caregiving, it was immense.
Yeah, the burden can be overwhelming, even with love.
It led to that incredibly tough decision, looking for assisted living for Lou. Guan captures that feeling so bleakly. Once aging led to debility, It was impossible for anyone to be happy.
That's a really heavy thought.
It is, but that dissatisfaction also fueled innovation. Karen Wilson's story is amazing. Her mom, Jessie, had a stroke, fairly young, ended up in an institution.
And she hated it.
Desperately, all she wanted was to go home. Not necessarily back to her old house, but to a place that felt like home.
What did that mean for her?
Simple things, really. A small space of her own stuff around her. Control, locking her door, setting the thermostat, her own furniture. Things impossible in a typical nursing home then. That need for personal space, it's fundamental. Wilson realized nursing homes, even with good intentions, were built for control. Her radical idea, flip it. Prioritize the resident's control. That was the birth of assisted living. Home was the key concept.
And getting that first place, Park Place, up and running was a battle.
Oh yeah, financial hurdles, regulations. But the core shift was huge. Care providers entering the resident's home, not the other way around. It changes the whole power dynamic.
So the original idea was resident control over schedule, rules, risk, choices.
Exactly. Total shift. And interestingly, this resonates with research by Laura Carstensen on socio-emotional selectivity theory.
Okay, what's that?
Basically, as we sense our time might be limited maybe through age, maybe illness, our focus shifts. We move away from chasing long-term goals and more towards appreciating everyday joys, close relationships.
And that makes people happier in older age.
Often, yeah, more emotionally satisfied. It's a perspective on time, not just age itself. Think about it. If you felt time is short, what would you prioritize?
Close connections, probably.
Yeah.
Simple pleasures.
Exactly. Carstensen did studies comparing healthy people and terminally ill men. Those with limited time horizons, they strongly preferred hanging out with people they felt emotionally close to.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But that original vision of assisted living, it didn't always stick.
Unfortunately, no. It got so popular that, well, the market took over in many cases. Facilities popped up prioritizing profit over Wilson's core idea of real resident control and enough support services.
Gawande mentions that few places actually offer both privacy and sufficient services. So the label assisted living doesn't always mean what it started out as.
Right. And Karen Wilson herself ended up leaving the company she founded over that exact issue, profit versus quality, especially for lower-income folks in smaller towns she cared about.
That tension is everywhere in healthcare, isn't it? Profit versus patient needs.
Always. Lou Sanders' experience kind of reflects this compromised reality, too. He resisted assisted living at first. He visited places, saw mostly people with walkers, felt he wouldn't belong.
But then he fell again.
Yeah, sadly. That forced the issue. He moved into a facility, but Gawande says he got really depressed, felt lost, the activities weren't for him, felt geared towards a different group.
And Gawande points out a problem here. How do we even measure success in these places beyond just keeping people safe and healthy?
Exactly. The focus stays on the physical, but what about loneliness, social connection, emotional well-being?
There's also the critique that they market more to the adult kids, right? Playing up safety, amenities.
Yeah, things that reassure the middle-aged children, but maybe don't center the parents' own choices and autonomy, whose needs are really being prioritized.
So, wrapping up this part, the big challenge remains. Without that old-style family support network, older people often face this awful choice. Unsafe independence, maybe, or a controlled, medicalized institution that's safe, but empty, lacking meaning.
That's the dilemma. Which leads us to people trying to find alternatives, like Bill Thomas at Chase Memorial Nursing Home.
His experiment sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Bringing in plants, animals, kids.
Totally radical at the time. Directly challenging the sterile, risk-averse nursing home norm, he wanted to fight the residents' despair by injecting life back into the place. A Big Bang approach.
There was resistance, I bet.
Oh, yeah. Gawande tells that story about wanting birds. Regulations said no. Thomas asked, okay, but without them, what sounds will residents hear in the dead of winter? Just silence. Machines.
It's hard. His belief was that a good life needs independence, purpose, right?
Absolutely. And he saw the nursing home actively denying those things.
So how did the Big Bang go? Chaos.
A bit chaotic initially, probably, but ultimately incredibly positive. Residents, staff, everyone got involved caring for the pets, the plants. It created this lively, heightened environment.
It reminds me of that philosopher, Josiah Royce.
Yeah.
He talked about loyalty, the human need for a cause beyond ourselves to find meaning, transcendence, helping others.
That's a great connection. It feels like a fundamental drive. And Gawande argues our modern way of handling elder care often fails because it denies exactly that. We prioritize safety over meaning, connection, purpose.
So Thomas and Wilson, in their own ways, were trying to fix that.
Yeah.
Help people keep experiencing life's value, even when dependent.
Exactly. Thomas brought in life itself. Wilson focused on autonomy, control over your own space.
Are there other models emerging now?
Yeah, things like the household model Gawande mentions at places like Newbridge. Smaller groups, private rooms, shared living areas, trying to feel more like home within the institution. And importantly, it can be done affordably.
That's good to hear. Like Sanborn Place, that low-income apartment complex.
Right, managed by Carmen Carson. Her whole mission is enabling people to live independently till the very end, even with major disabilities. She fights for their autonomy, their right to make choices, even bad ones.
She sounds like a force, battling the system to get people back home from the hospital.
Totally. Preventing unnecessary institutionalization. That story of Wayne reuniting with his mom there after a nursing home stay. Powerful stuff. It's about belonging.
And Lou Sanders eventually found a better fit, too.
He did. Leonard Florence Center for Living. The focus there really was individual choice. When to wake up, sleep. He got into technology, connected online, found purpose again.
It shows adapting the environment works.
And Lou's own takeaway. Life's worth living because of simple pleasures, connecting with others. It's often that simple.
So true. Now, shifting focus a bit, dealing with terminal illness. Gawande shares Sarah Monopoly's story.
So heartbreaking. Diagnosed with advanced lung cancer right after having her baby.
And the initial treatments were aggressive.
Very. And the emotional, physical toll was huge, especially when they didn't ultimately work against the cancer.
That leads to this really important study he mentions. Aggressive treatments near death sometimes make things worse.
Yeah, worse quality of life for the patient and higher rates of depression for their caregivers later on. It seriously questions that default do-everything approach at the very end.
So what's the alternative? Palliative care.
Exactly. And specifically early palliative care or concurrent care. It's not about giving up. It's integrating symptom management, pain, nausea, anxiety, and emotional support right alongside the cancer treatments.
And the results are surprising.
Kind of mind-blowing, actually. Studies show it leads to more hospice use later, fewer hospital stays, lower costs. And sometimes people even live longer.
Longer? How does that work?
It seems counterintuitive, right? But maybe by managing suffering better, people tolerate treatments better or make different choices sooner. That big Mass General study on lung cancer patients showed it clearly. Early palliative care meant stopping chemo sooner, less suffering, earlier hospice, and yes, longer survival.
Wow. It challenges that whole fight to the bitter end mentality.
Fundamentally. And look at La Crosse, Wisconsin. They made end-of-life discussions routine for everyone admitted to healthcare.
Just talked about it up front.
Yeah. And the result? Lower end-of-life costs, and crucially, a much higher chance that patient wishes were actually known and followed. Just talking makes a huge difference.
Gawande admits finding these conversations hard himself at first. A patient reacted badly to prolong your life.
Language matters so much. That phrase focuses only on time, not quality, not what matters to the person.
Like that daughter asking about her dad. Could he still watch baseball? Eat ice cream? If he survived the risky surgery.
That's the stuff. Understanding priorities beyond just staying alive. What makes life meaningful for that individual?
So doctors need to have what Gawande calls a breakpoint discussion.
Exactly. A conscious shift. Moving from fight for more time at all costs to, okay, what else matters now in the time we have? It means acknowledging limits.
And patients need help with that shift. Guidance.
Absolutely. Help understanding options, weighing burdens versus benefits, avoiding treatments they don't really want that might just cause more suffering.
It's good news, then, that more people in the U.S. are choosing hospice and dying at home.
It's a positive trend, yeah. Suggests a growing awareness.
Gawande gets very personal talking about his own father's spinal tumor.
Yeah, the uncertainty, the conflicting medical advice, it sounds incredibly difficult. And the contrast between the surgeons.
One very paternalistic, this is what we do.
And the other more collaborative, counseling-focused. It shows how much the how of these conversations matters.
He also brings up second-order desires. What's that?
It's like what you want to want. You might want to fight hard, but you also might want to avoid pointless suffering. Doctors sometimes need to help patients see if their immediate choice aligns with those deeper values.
Makes sense. He talks about that patient with ovarian cancer, the ODTAA syndrome.
One damn thing after another. Yeah. That relentless cycle of crises and interventions that can happen near the end, it sounds exhausting.
But his father had an unexpected turn after retiring from surgery.
Yeah. Became a Rotary governor, found new purpose. It shows how important autonomy is, being able to redefine yourself, even when things change physically.
But then the paralysis got worse.
It did. Fear of being a burden, difficult times.
Yeah.
Then, amazingly, surgery helped. He regained mobility for a while. Life isn't always a straight line down.
But the final decline came.
Yeah. Fear, wanting it to be over to avoid more suffering, that's when they brought hospice in at home.
And the hospice nurse was key.
Hugely important, Gawande says. Practical advice, pain management, but most of all, focusing on his dad's comfort, his priorities, that idea of living for the best possible day to day.
Not sacrificing today for an uncertain tomorrow.
Exactly. Gawande talks about courage here, not being fearless, but having strength knowing what's feared or hoped for.
And wisdom being prudent strength.
Right. Two kinds of courage needed, facing reality and then acting on what you find truly matters.
Like Jewel Douglas, with their bowel obstruction from cancer. Balancing more time versus potential suffering versus enjoying everyday life.
Those are the wrenching decisions. Gawande's description of his father's last months is so moving, finding joy in small things, family moments.
And making that hard choice not to intubate during the stroke. Aligning choices with his values.
Even that difficult night in the hospital, pain, wanting to go home, it highlights the system's limits when survival is the only goal.
But his last days at home sounded peaceful. Still finding pleasure.
Yeah, food, connection, ultimately wanting peace.
It really comes back to that, doesn't it? Gawande concludes by talking about the meaning found in helping people navigate these limits, aligning the end with their values, their loyalties.
Absolutely. Sharing his father's wishes, the Hindu rituals for moksha, it symbolizes that peaceful, meaningful end. It's a powerful reminder for all of us, really, about how we approach mortality, our own and others. It matters deeply.